Russell, thank you for having me to the West Coast Truth.
Dannion, for the audience who doesn't know who you are, briefly tell us who you are and an overview of what you do.
Okay, my name is Dannion Brinkley. I'm a 62-year-old guy from South Carolina. I grew up basically as a jerk, tough guy. I'm 6'4", 236 pounds, basically just a jackass. And I didn't believe in anything. I only believed in how much damage I could do and how destructive I could become. And then on September 17th at 7:05 p.m. on 1975, I discovered that there was more to this life than just me. And that this life was more creative and a greater and rarer and more beautiful opportunity than I'd ever conceived of. Being from South Carolina, religiously, in the spiritual perspective, everybody goes to hell where I come from. I all of a sudden discovered that everybody doesn't. That there is a multidimensional reality of beauty and wonderment that we all exist in and live in and are from and are about. I was struck by lightning. It hit me talking on the telephone. It hit me in the side of the neck and it went down my spine. It went through my feet. It welded the nails of the heels of my shoes to the floor, threw me in the air, suspended me in the air, slammed me back down on the bed. Dead for 28 minutes, completely paralyzed for 6 days, partially paralyzed for 7 months. It took me 2 years to learn to walk and feed myself. What you have to realize, Russell, is there was no such thing as the near-death experience. Raymond Moody had not written his landmark book, Life After Life. I had nowhere to go and nowhere to turn. And everything I believed, thought, and built my life around disappeared in that next 2 years.
Did you become a kook?
I think I came a little worse than that. I think I became an obsessive, compulsive, crazy person.
Okay.
You cannot go through the art of a near-death experience and have nowhere to turn, no books written about it, no scientific evidence, no religious evidence, no points of reference, but it was more real. I lifted out of my body. I watched what was going on. I could see that I was in a blue-gray place, a place between this world and the next. I watched them load me in the ambulance. I was sitting in the ambulance, and the paramedic said, he's gone. And I thought, gone where? Because my body was there, the paramedic was there, and I was there watching this event. Then I heard these series of chimes and tones, these beautiful, beautiful melodic sounds. And I could sense a feeling as though I was being pulled, and I looked over my left shoulder and I could see a tunnel forming. And I couldn't see a light at the end of it, but it seemed to me, Russell, as it was the natural process. And I began to go down this tunnel, and I came to this place of beautiful, brilliant light. And I was watching this event from more bewilderment and not really realizing that I was, quote unquote, dead. The most amazing thing that all of us will discover when our so-called time comes is that nobody ever really dies. It never happens. And all the baloney that's been talked about and infused in us as a belief system is utter nonsense. In the course of watching this experience, I think the greatest lesson from what the near-death experience is a term I coined in the mid-'70s called the Panoramic Life Review. And I hope everybody listens to this. There will come a time in your life when you will see your life pass before you in a 360-degree panorama. You will realize that you have missed nothing. You have seen every single detail from the moment you opened your eyes to the last breath you breathe. You will then watch that review from a second-person point of view, as if you were your own best friend looking at the choices that you made and seeing how close you came to making the right choice, but never in judgment. And then, Russell, you literally become every person that you have ever encountered. And you feel the direct results of your interaction between that person. You literally become that person. And as you literally become that person, you get to see the intention, the reason why you did it. Not what you did, but why you did it, as the factor of what you see. And then there is a system of judgment. And these are all Dannion terms for something far more expansive and far more complex and of wonderment. But, you know, country boys cut to the chase. There is a system of, well, you know, I was born at night, but it wasn't last night.
Right.
And a country boy just looks at it for what it is and takes from it what has the PowerPoints and incorporates in their life. They're not full of random philosophical and intellectual paradigm perspectives.
Yeah. Aw, shucks.
That's better. You come to a place where you judge, and we've always heard that the book of Great Hall of Records and the book of judgment, and God's going to open the book up and look and see. No. Who do you think knows more about you than anybody else? You do. So you judge you. And what is so important, Russell, is this. Everybody, remember, when you look back at your life when this time comes for you, it's going to be based on this. If the divine, or what you believe to be divine, could not come today, or if God could not come today, and God sent you, in the life you just reviewed, what difference did the divine make? That was the number one point of the whole experience. Although I did go to some, what is now considered some pretty cosmic levels, and I went to a place called the Crystal Cities, and I realized that there are multiple crystal cities, so we don't all come from the same place. I was given a preview of the probable possibilities of the future, and realizing that nothing was carved in stone, and I have become reasonably famous and for these so-called boxes of knowledge, which I wrote about in Saved by the Light. And I've become reasonably famous because these things have come true. So when you look to see whether the divine or the heavenly worlds or the divine realms understands where we're going, not predestiny, but understands where we're going, then there becomes a certain amount of comfort in that this life was designed for us to achieve certain goals, but it has designed space that you occupy and work in. I came out of that. I met Dr. Raymond Moody. He was going to medical school at the Medical University, the Medical College of Georgia, and that is where they took me when I had this experience. And he saw an article in the newspaper about me being struck by lightning. We followed up and became very fast friends, and so I became a part of the movement that was the near-death movement that came about from Raymond's book. Raymond and I remained friends for years and years and years, and all friendships have sometimes where they fray. But Raymond is a brilliant, wonderful person, and I have lived the last 35 years in the death experience. In 1989, because of complications from being struck by lightning, I had to have open heart surgery. Well, if you think about it, then I had a second near-death experience. I wasn't dead, but I was on life support. I watched the open heart surgery. I could describe to the doctors and the nurses the conversations that they had. I went down the tunnel. I had a second panoramic life review, and I saw the difference that the first one had made. I was less of a jerk. I was more focused in compassion and caring, and I had become a hospice volunteer, because when you go through this kind of experience, you transform into a person that focuses on being the difference that the divine makes, not in a high and mighty place or in a place of great awe, but in the simple task you do every day, in the simple thought patterns that you have each and every day. And I realized that I had changed and I had grown in a way that I knew that if the divine couldn't come today and they sent me, in the life I will review, what difference did the divine make? And I realized the greatest difference that I could make was in service, being at the bedside of people who are frightened and terrified and family members who do not know how to process and deal with this. So I think that's the wonderment of it. Then in 1997, because of complications from being struck by lightning and open heart surgery, I had to have brain surgery. And it seems like I never get it, Russell. That's like every 10 or 12 years they have to kill me just to keep me focused because I'm ADHD and slightly obsessive compulsive. Mm-hmm. But in 1997, I had a third near-death experience. Now, I had 5 surgeries, and 3 of them were near-death experiences. So in the course of the last 35 years, and becoming this hospice volunteer with more than $27,000 at the bedside. And I've been with 2,005 people who were leaving this world, and I've been with 421 taking their last breath. I'd have to say that I'm an expert in this process, both what happens before, during, and after. And so I wrote a book called Saved by the Light that sold millions and millions and millions and millions of copies worldwide. I wrote another book called At Peace in the Light in 1995, which would detail the exact events that are unfolding in my life today. What I wrote about is my plan to fulfill what I thought to be my vision. I wrote in a book called At Peace in the Light. They're all on Amazon. And then I wrote a third book called The Secrets of the Light, where I took 60 years of looking, 58 years of looking at all of this and try to give people a way that they can take these truths, these 7 truths that I wrote in secret, and match events in their life to them so they'd have a clear perspective based on everything that I have learned of how to see, how to handle what's going on in your life and the person who you love or the person who loves you in their transition. And I'm presently writing a book called 10 Things You Need to Know Before You Go. Because if we don't find a sense of humor, Russell, and we don't find the fact that most people, when you ask this question, I'll ask you, do you know what the number 1 cause of death in America is?
Heart disease?
Birth.
Yes, it's a terminal illness. That's true.
Yeah, and like your mama said, if you do number 1, you're going to do number 2.
No one gets out alive.
Well, everybody gets out alive. But it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we know and have affirmed in our reality this process.
But if there's an end, then you do expire at some point.
No, the spiritual being never expires.
Okay.
You know, it's like Barry Manilow. We've been around forever, and we probably maybe didn't write the very first song. We probably hummed a few bars of it. There is no death for a spiritual being. There is only many different kinds of lives and experiences that we have to better grow and understand how to be co-creators. This life is about becoming God-like. How do you co-create? The passionate, compassionate, loving perspective of service and helping others, appearing to be separate from everybody else. We've always heard this term, Russell, that we're all one, we're all connected, everybody's a part of the whole, and yet you can look and see you're separate from the person next to you. And this just became some kind of mythology. Today, we know we are all connected. Science has created something, have determined the perspective of something called dark matter. And it moves and connects everything. And the planets of the universe are suspended in dark matter. They've become so caught up into this perspective that they spent $17 billion building the CERN collider, where they're colliding electrons and photons to try to create the Big Bang Theory, where they say we came from, and the Higgs-Boson particle, which they call the God particle. Mm-hmm. And I believe that sooner or later, this was an equation that a scientist wrote down in the 40s, that he believed, based on looking at quantum and particle physics that this equation would prove to be that point where matter comes into existence. These are things that now we have to look at as human beings to understand the spiritualness of us. It's where science and religion are merging. And so I am a person that has spent these years studying and trying to help people not be afraid. Because if they're afraid, they miss some of the best parts of transition from this world to the next.
And with that, Dannion, let's transition into the break. We'll be back in 2 minutes with today's guest, Dannion Brinkley. We're back with Dannion Brinkley. Dannion, when things were revealed to you, I know you said that you see things through your own perspective, but did you meet God? Did God reveal these things to you?
No. A series of beings of light. Some people call them angels, Russell. I'm not capable, because when I came back into this realm of consciousness, so many terms that people use are no longer applicable. You know, I went through the point of where if there was God, I couldn't have handled meeting God. I don't think I could handle it even in a divine perspective. But these beings of light that were there always and continuously around me were pretty wondrous. And when people call them angels, I had to go look up the word angels. And in Hebrew, the word angel means messenger. It doesn't mean anything else but that. Okay? And then when you see all these stories of beings of angels with wings, there is nowhere in the original Hebrew text that there were any angels with wings. And you had to go and look to see where winged creatures came from. And when the Old Testament was written, it was written during the Babylonian captivity of the Hebrews. And the winged creatures came from Babylonian concepts. And I think that it was used to help develop flight based on messengers. And then you had Mercury and Apollo in Greek and Roman history, winged. And we didn't really get winged beings until the Renaissance and these paintings. So I never met God, but I met beings of light that were equal to most people's concept of angels.
In your experience, does any of this equate to the Bible or the Christian understanding of angels and God, or is this completely separate?
I think that the truth is interwoven in what the Bible is. You know, we've come to be so forced to believe that every word in the Bible is the absolute truth. Well, that's just not true. And I believe that any book or anything that writes about the divinity of a spiritual being, or that we have a life after this one, and there are rules by which that we live and observe as spiritual beings in the human form, has accuracy to it. But I look at, there's so many difference in Christian and the Protestant perspective. There's so many different slants on what is to be believed. We would have to go through each one of them and look at what their belief system before I could answer quantitatively yes or no to that.
Well, let's take Buddhism, for example. I believe they believe in reincarnation.
Well, reincarnation was in the Bible until around 500 A.D. I think it was either Pius or Clement the First who eliminated that from the Bible. But the first 100 years of the Bible, the writings of Origen took reincarnation as a very point blank, because when they asked Jesus, who was Isaiah? Because in the Old Testament, the heralding of the coming of the Messiah, he said, ask John. And the point that's really funny is Isaiah was called the voice of the wilderness, and John the Baptist was also called the voice of the wilderness. So there is a point in reincarnation that still exists in the Bible. Do I believe in reincarnation? I don't know, Russell. There is nothing that I had in any of these experiences that I can say categorically that reincarnation is a part of it. But do I believe in reincarnation? Yes, because I believe in it because when you tour the world with some of the most brilliant minds, Raymond Moody and Brian Weiss and Winifred Lucas and John, oh God, I can't think of John's last name, but I had the opportunity. He was a professor at Harvard, John Mack. And when you sit with these people and you listen to them as scientists go over deep hypnotherapies and people in recalling and these past lives that come forward, you have a tendency to believe them because they're not trying to prove anything. They're having conversations. When you do conferences, you have to go to the conference, the guy who put the conference on or the lady who puts the conference on, and sit around and at their parties so that they can usually gloat a little bit. And you have conversations that are, I wish that everyone who was attending the program had a chance to come to those personal, interactive conversations.
My father used to say, I used to believe in reincarnation, but that was in a previous life.
And which is a very accurate perspective. Because if it does occur, then it would be naturally a part of the process, Russell, that you would shut that off because the goals given and designed by you and the goals given, designed by the divine, for you to have this rare, wondrous opportunity to be alive and to live in this particular sphere at the time that you chose, it would be unnecessary and troublesome to have a life, to have a remembrance of those lives. Mm-hmm. In Secrets of the Light, I write that the two of the perspectives is you choose to come, but you're also chosen to come. And if you weren't chosen to be born at the exact moment, at the exact place, in this exact social psychological grouping, you would never have an opportunity to be here. There is no happenstance, chance, or purpose. There is a specific order and a specific nature by which you come.
Then there are souls, and they occupy bodies.
Well, there is consciousness that occupies the body. The soul is that part that connects to everything. I don't so much believe, Russell, in individual soul identity. I don't, because when I entered those crystal cities, I became a part of a soul consciousness. I was no longer Dannion. People have to remember, through this process, I didn't stay Dannion until I stayed Dannion in that perspective until I got to the crystal city. And then I had no more point of view that was mine. I was a part of a collective. I was like the Borg on Star Trek. I was assimilated. And I had an overview and a connectiveness. I knew that there were other individual consciousnesses within the soul. But I was a part of that soul group.
Wow. How did you get to the crystal cities?
The being of light, when you first go, and this will happen to everybody, you are met by a being of light. This being will come. And when this being comes, it's a sense, it's like, you know what it's like if you get caught by your father doing something as opposed to your grandfather? If your father catches you, he's going to beat your butt.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, that's the difference.
Yeah, but if your grandfather catches you, you just have to listen to it and smile and be sorry, and at the end you could probably still hit him up for a quarter.
Yeah, get some ice cream.
Well, but that's about the way it is with this being of light. And people call this light Buddha, Muhammad, Allah, God, Jesus. There's so many names, but after making this journey and studying probably 1,000 cases of this, that being that you meet is you. If you stop to think about it, Russell, no one ever left heaven. You've never left that divine place. So that person, it's like you put on a pair of gloves and you're focused on playing with those pair of gloves in this life, but you have never left heaven. And somebody asked me the other day in a lecture, they said, how in that can that be possible? I said, well, in the Bible, there says there's 7 heavens. Genesis says there's 7 heavens. I said, but think about this. Your body is made up of cells. And in those cells, you have molecules. And in those molecules, you have atoms. If you take all the empty space out of a cell, which is like 98% empty space, and then you take all the empty space out of a molecule, which is like 92% empty space, and you take all the empty space out of an atom, which is 94.6% empty space, and you took all the space out of all of the cells, molecules, and atoms of every person on the earth, all 7 billion of us. If you took all the empty space, the matter that is left would fit in a matchbox. So 7 billion people with empty space taken out of the so-called material structure of the human body, everybody would fit into a matchbox. That's when you really start to think about who you are. And you really start to think about that physical matter, which we now know scientifically does not exist. And it can be replicated over and over in the laboratory. It's just energy vibrating at different frequencies, photon and electron bombardment. If that is a scientific fact, Russell, then where are you? And not only that, who are you? And for we who've had the near-death experience, that scientific stuff doesn't bother us. We are spiritual beings with dignity, direction, and purpose. Everybody is that. And once you start to look at the science of what we call quantum, which is, and there's like 7 or 8 different theories in quantum. My favorite theory is the chaos theory, because I think I am the greatest proponent of the chaos theory. But when you start to look at this as true scientific fact, the only conclusion you're going to come to is your spiritual relevance.
In the Gospel of Thomas, it says that heaven is a place within you.
Well, see, Thomas knew what he was talking about, that doubting fool.
Well, they kicked it out of the Bible.
Yeah, but, you know, when you go to the Edict of Nicaea and then the Edict of Milan, 325 to 348.
Yeah. Council of Nicaea, yeah.
Yeah, when you start looking at that, you start to see that it was about business. It was about control. It's like when you look at the national, this bill that was just passed that declared the United States a battleground, the National Authorization Act that President Obama signed. I think that a lot of the history of the Bible and religions is a lot about like this bill that was just passed that makes you an enemy of the state. And so without conformity, then these paradigms came into play, these control mechanisms and these actions that were necessary. If you don't do this, you're going to hell. If you don't do this, unless you pay an indulgence, all that kind of stuff. I was not a Bible scholar in those days, Russell, but I had to become that so I could understand what had happened to me. So I spent a lot of time studying the history of religions. And if you look at all religions, the basic core principles of all religions on the earth today is still Zoroastrianism.
Yeah, it all goes back to Sumerian culture and Egyptian culture.
Well, Sumerian even more than Egyptian.
Well, of course.
I mean, the Sumerians, that's where the Anunnaki and the Nephilims and the giants and the gods coming and laying down with women and the birth of hybrids and the Zechariah Sitchin's story of the 12th planet, the Nibiru, and the fact that we are alien, we are from alien origin, and, you know, all of those things start to come into play. But the fact that all of that still leads back to the spirituality of the existence, regardless of how we came into existence, those core things, compassion and caring and loving actions, and always keeping as pure and as focused and intent in what you're doing so the outcome better helps to divine your ability to co-create. It is the little tiny things that you do that make a difference. When you pat somebody on the back and say it's going to be okay, when you help someone open a door across the street, when you say thank you, or when you smile at a little kid, or when you give support, these are the things that matter.
But you said there is no heaven and hell. So there's
I didn't say that.
You didn't?
I just said that where everybody let me let you finish your question, Russell.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, I thought you said that there is no heaven and hell. So therefore, there's no judgment. You're neither good or bad.
I can guarantee you there's a heaven because I've been there. Okay, as to hell, when you start looking at hell as a concept, how can an angel get mad because God likes human beings more than he likes angels, throw a tantrum, and go and create a place that he gets 3 or 4 other stupid angels to go, and he creates a place outside of divine? That is scientifically impossible unless it is a thought pattern that you develop as a process about reward and punishment. There is no other way it could exist. So if hell exists, it exists in the minds and matter as a system of judgment that's self-imposed. Okay, so, and I hear all these stories about this evil Antichrist, Satan, Lucifer, Beelzebub, the devil. I mean, I'm absolutely sure that the Lucifer has been in the witness protection program with all these aliases and names that he has and all these powers that he develops and has through the years. But I just honestly, I do believe in evil because it becomes a concentration of control. And that is an identity that creates reward and punishment, like terrorism has become the basic code of how we lose our civil liberties. But I think hell is a self-imposed psychology that people place upon themselves to define punishment or to define control. But I know there's a heaven because I've been there. And I can promise you this. If you had grown up with me and if you knew me growing up, if there was anybody that was going to hell, I'm your Huckleberry, son. I should have gone to hell without any question.
Well, let's take a break. We'll be back after the break with today's guest, Dannion Brinkley. We're back with Dannion Brinkley. Dannion, having a good time?
I'm really enjoying you and the tempo of your show, so I know your audience has to be really terrific.
They're excellent people.
And let me, before you ask me a question,
yeah,
what got you into being a messenger?
Well, I would say Art Bell from Coast to Coast AM many, many years ago. 15 years ago, I was listening to Art Bell and all of the great guests on his show. You were on Art Bell's show many times.
Yeah, I love Art.
And
Ramona.
Yeah, and of course, Ramona passed away. That really introduced me to a whole world of different things, and it allowed me to think open-mindedly. And when you think open-mindedly, as long as your brains don't fall out, you're going to learn some things. And in that search, I find myself becoming an activist and wanting to share what I've learned, and of course, have the best guests I can on this show.
Well, I'm really proud. Art was really good to me, and Art opened the door for a lot of people, and Art was basically a skeptic, which made him a great interviewer because he would give you all the rope you needed to hang yourself.
Yeah.
And it's what made him so great. And that friendship developed and grew and grew and grew. And then when Ramona passed, Art went through a really tough time. And, we all know how many times he went back and forth on the air until finally he just decided that it was enough. And he went to the Philippines and he fell in love. He got married and he has a child that's completely transformed his whole life. And so I am happy that Art Bell inspired you. I'm going to give credit to your mom and dad also for being inspirational from our conversation before we went on the air. Mm-hmm. But thank you for taking your time to give the opportunity to spread the possibilities of who we are as opposed to who we're told we are and the rules of being told what we have to live under.
By the way, for the audience, there is a interview on the West Coast Truth of Art Bell interviewing Dannion Brinkley when you were in the hospital.
And here's what's funny about that. I was struck by lightning on September the 17th at 7:05 p.m., 1975.
Approximately.
Uh-huh. I had brain surgery September the 17th at 7:05 a.m. on a Wednesday afternoon during a thunderstorm. September the 17th at 7:05 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon during a thunderstorm, I was struck by lightning. September the 17th at 7:05 a.m. on a Wednesday morning during a thunderstorm, I had brain surgery. Now that shows you that the divine has a serious sense of humor.
Do you find it funny?
I didn't find it funny at the time because I never put that into perspective. You know, I was dealing with so much pain during the lightning and so much pain during this brain surgery with 3 subdural hematomas and then a massive grand mal seizure that put me in the neurocardiac ward on life support. I didn't really care about all of that. But when I go back and look at that, it's exactly 12 hours earlier. It's Wednesday. It's September 17th, and it's a thunderstorm. There is a part about that that makes me reflective, that it's orderly, that there are ways in which things do occur that we don't really pay attention to because we've developed a term called coincidences. And I always say, I believe in coincidences. I just have never seen one. So I hope everybody goes back and listens to those interviews because I get a chance when Art did this show the other night that we were talking about.
Yeah, you were on Art Bell's show somewhere in time on Saturday?
Yeah. And that was July the 18th, 1997, and I had just created the Twilight Brigade, which is my foundation that trains people to deal with end-of-life care. Everybody's going to be a hospice volunteer sooner or later, and the quicker you face that and the quicker you become aware of techniques and protocol and procedures, the more empowered you are to live your life. And I don't want my life to be about near death. I want my life to be about the joy and the opportunity and the privilege that this life is. So back to the prophecies and the boxes of knowledge.
So moving away from the near-death experience stuff, we'll move into some of the juicier things. Well, I don't know about juicier, but these are, what do we call these? Prophecies?
Well, I never called them that, Russell. I wasn't an expert on the near-death experience at the time that Raymond and I began to talk about this, that Dr. Moody and I. And I didn't know how much about the near-death experience you were supposed to tell people or not tell people. I didn't want to become, I didn't know they were professorial perspectives. I just didn't know what they were. And as I told Raymond all these things, it was Raymond who brought this to the public. It was Dr. Moody who I told about the collapse of the Soviet Union and what would happen, the collapse of the United States, that they would put military, that so many people would be crossing over from the Mexican border that they would have to put station military people on the Mexican and American border. I told about Chernobyl. This is 75. I described Chernobyl, but I called it wormwood. And then we discovered that Chernobyl is a Ukrainian word for wormwood. And this is stuff that Raymond realized, not me. And then we sat down and looked at this 117 things and how I had broken down in categories of each of these boxes of knowledge that I was given from these spiritual beings in the Crystal City. And we realized that they were future events. And it was 4 years before one of these happened. And it was Raymond who called me. And it was the beginning of what now becomes prophecy. But it's amazing, Russell, how accurate. It's not me. I'm just describing what I saw the best of my ability. Like today, back then in 1975, when I talked to Raymond, which was like 1970, late 76, because it was probably a full year before I could be cognizant. And I was describing Iranians with submarines. And that they would be seeking to block the flow of oil from the Middle East to the rest of the world, and that there would be a big issue over Jerusalem. and that the Arabs and the Chinese would be making pacts that would negate Western consciousness or Western power and influence. And we're there today. That the United States would go bankrupt. We're now there today. And so all these things come to tell me that the probable possibilities of the pathways that we're taking, they were seen, and that it's still in our power and our control to make a difference.
You know, I use words, prophecies, God. I'm just trying to put terms or labels on something that I can't quite understand.
Well, you know what's really fun is that when you don't know, what was so fun in the early days, Russell, I didn't know. You know, I had no idea what this was. And what prophecies, I call them probable possibilities, because I don't believe in that the concept that it's a prearranged life and that stuff. But there are guidelines. And in these guidelines, one of the things that was in the boxes of knowledge was that, and this is 1975, and that if we kept going the same way that we were going, and I related that to military because I was in the Marine Corps doing that Vietnam mess, and it said if we kept doing the same things that we would be doing, that we would, 30 years from then, we would end up in the same place. And then we were in Afghanistan, and now we're in Iraq, and now we just put 12,000 troops in Libya. And now we've massed more than 100,000 troops just outside of the Straits of Hormuz. And we've moved an entire battle group into the Arabian Sea.
Yeah.
So all that stuff was talked about in those boxes of knowledge. And we're finding ourselves exactly where we were 30 years ago, 35 years ago. I mean, we're in that same paradigm. War, one thing that I learned from these adventures into the next world is that I am not against war, but I am for peace. And the way that we are doing what we're doing won't work. It won't work.
Tell me about box number 6.
That was about Chernobyl.
Was that about Chernobyl, not nuclear war?
Well, it was about that nuclear was losing its power. See, the one thing that I keep going back and forth over this nuclear business, okay, and that there would be 2 catastrophes, which one was Chernobyl, and the other was, which everybody says never came true, that I thought was in Norway because of fjords and high mountain ranges, and the only way that I could see it. And so when it didn't happen, quote unquote, and, you know, we now know that Chernobyl killed hundreds of thousands of people. And if you go to the Ukraine, which I have been there, you realize that the first thing to go is the thyroid. And if you look at how many people have had their thyroid removed in the Ukraine and in the drift of where that radioactive cloud came, then you would see it. Now we have Fukushima. But when you looked at the nuclear war, I always saw it's chemical and biological. And I believe the focus on nuclear is wrong, because you can do more damage with biological and chemical weaponry than you could ever do with nuclear, because nuclear creates radioactivity and death, and then it makes the land unusable. Think about this. A third of the country of Japan is now useless for 10,000 years. And when you start to think like that, nuclear becomes obsolete. So this whole business about Iran developing a nuclear weapon is some kind of hogwash that people are using to force Iran into whatever the reason is. Because think of this, Russell. The Iranians are Shia. Okay, there's 1.4 billion Muslims, followers of Islam. Shia, Sunni, and Wahhabi. But Wahhabis are still Sunnis. For anybody to think that Iran would bomb Israel is crazy. The 2 most sacred sites, Mecca and the Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock is in Jerusalem. If some Shias decided to bomb Israel and destroy with a nuclear weapon, that would destroy the Dome of the Rock. That means 1.2 billion Sunnis would wipe them from the face of the earth. No Islamic fundamentalist or terrorist is going to blow up Mecca or the Dome of the Rock. That's just not going to happen. And no organized theocracy like Iran and Khomeini, that's just not going to happen. So what is the real reason? That's when it gets to be interesting. What is the real reason for all this this propaganda about Iran that we hear in the news every day, that they're going to get a nuclear weapon? And as of January the 18th, there is no agency, not the Mossad, not the CIA, not the National Security Administration, not the IAE or the United Nations. None of them believe and have written, none of them believe that Iran is in the process of making a nuclear weapon. Mm-hmm. So I wonder what the real truth is.
I'll throw my idea out there. It's a banking dictatorships, and we're living in a corporate fascist world right now.
And you're exactly correct, and that's in the boxes of knowledge too. I think that's in box 11 and 12.
Well, let's talk about them.
Chip implants.
Oh.
The chip implant. I go through this whole scenario about this is like 1976, Russell.
Yeah, but you weren't talking about microchips then, were they?
No, nobody even heard of it.
Yeah.
And here I am ranting on like a lunatic about chip implants and that the technology of chips, and that, people can read this, that the invention of it, and that chips would be inserted in the skin to regulate life, and I always said the battle for humankind would be fought in healthcare, because at the point that one dictatorship controls your healthcare, what would you do to protect your parents, your children, your grandchildren, and yourself? And once that power is focused in a central point, then the battle for the souls of humankind would truly be at stake. Well, that's this year. And I wrote At Peace in the Light to describe this scenario that was going to come about. And that was in 1995, but it was all based on stuff that came through this near-death experience in 1975.
Well, let's talk about this, Dannion. We got to take a break. Sorry to cut you off, but we'll talk about your second book during our final segment, okay? So we'll be back after the break with Dannion Brinkley. All right, well, we're back with Dannion Brinkley for this final segment. Wow, what a brilliant show. I really appreciate your time today, sir.
I appreciate you asking me, Russell.
So you've written how many books now? 3?
3.
And of course, your first one was a runaway bestseller. You sold a lot of books. You educated a lot of people about the things that we talk about today. Your second book, At Peace in the Light, what made you write this second book? Was there something incomplete from the first one? Did things change?
I think what happened to me, Russell, was this. I wanted to write a trilogy. I wanted to write a group of books, the Light books. I wanted them because Saved by It is, each title meant a lot to me. Because what happened to me in the transformation of Dannion into a far better person, it took death to do it. And then At Peace, becoming comfortable, because remember, by the time I had grown into the near-death experience, it had hit its rage in the late 80s and early 90s. It was just a phenomena that everybody had to argue with, and that doctors said was oxygen brain deprivation, temporal lobe seizures, frontal lobe seizures, anaphylactic shock. Everybody could write it off, and I believe that some of the things that people call near-death experiences do come under that. But in the late 80s and the early 90s, this had become no longer a phenomena. It was the fact of cardiopulmonary resuscitation and the advancements of chemistry and pharmacology that we were coming back. And it hit that place, and I had been living in it for years and years and years then. And so when At Peace in the Light came into being, which was 2 years, roughly 2 years, because it takes about a year and a half to write a book. And when At Peace came into play, Russell, it was at the point where I saw clearly that this phenomena was going to grow into a perspective of where healthcare was going to come into a dictatorship. That they had to create, that those who were in control would have to create a way that universal health care would be the issue, and then literally a dictatorship under a single organization. I never thought it would be the United States government or the Canadian government or, the British model, but we're there. And so when I saw that this was going to happen, I had to write a book about it. I had to write a book about me being at peace with the fact that I was no longer afraid of death. And I had begun to see so many of these boxes of knowledge come true, and that this dictatorship would someday come into existence, where today in the United States, we are there. And if you listen to the argument for the presidency of the United States of America, the battle will be over health care. So the legendary box of knowledge that said the chip implant would come into existence, the model of the health care, the battle for the souls of humankind would be, we are living in that place now. And I wrote a book of what I felt like the strategy would be necessary to achieve a way to bring people aware of that consciousness, because the way that it is written and presented today and the way that it's going to take effect, it'll be in healthcare. It won't be in terrorist acts. And so when I wrote At Peace, it was to detail my strategy. And I'll tell you something, Russell. At Peace in the Light did not sell near as many books as Saved by the Light, because Saved by the Light still sells thousands and thousands and thousands of books every month worldwide. But At Peace was the strategy of Dannion Brinkley and what was necessary to achieve a counterbalance to what is now in place. And so I wrote that book for that reason. And then I waited 15 years. Mm-hmm. Or 13 years, because I had nothing else to say. And then Secrets of the Light was, I'd become philosophical. I had developed, getting a little mature, I developed a philosophical edge, and I decided to write the things that I saw most important in being with thousands of people as they prepared to leave this world. And then to put it in a way that anyone could take Secrets of the Light, and they can take whatever issue that they're dealing with, and they can put it into one of those 7 truths and see it more clearly and help find the answer from a spiritual point of view, as instead of a stressful mental point of view.
Well, what are the 7 truths?
Well, you have to get Secrets of the Light to get to know that.
Okay. Well, can you give the audience 3 of them?
Yes. You choose to come and you're chosen to come. Mm-hmm. This is a way, when you're arguing with yourself. My favorite one is number 5. You chose to be here at this place and at this time because it is the point that you can make the greatest difference. And then when you use that one, that's the one I use most of the time, because when you use that, all this trouble or stress or whatever it is, I chose to be here because this is the opportunity I can make the greatest difference. And then I start looking for how to make changes and how to empower people, as opposed to be irritated or aggravated or angry or confused or hypocritical. And then there was a world before this one, and there's a world after this one. And once you start worrying about things, the world that you came from is the same place you go back to. And then what that does, Russell, is it puts in your mind that this is just an adventure. And I always used to tell people that this life is like summer camp. God sends us to the earth just to get us out of his hair. You come to summer camp, you meet some new friends, you get stung by a bee, you fall down, you have a great time, but after a couple of weeks, you just go back home. Mom and Dad get a break, or the divine gets a break. You get to have some fun, meet some challenges, but you always just go back home.
Shore leave.
Yeah, shore leave. Well, that's Navy talk. But when you put it in that point, it becomes less stressful, and it has a beginning and an end. I will go home after 2 weeks. Or I will go home for a man 74.2 years and for a woman 78.4 years.
Mm-hmm.
I will go home. That's not a real long time, Russell.
Just a 2-week sabbatical.
Yeah, of learning how to skin your knees and get involved and meet new friends and be frustrated, identifying who you are, having peer pressure, all these things that are necessary to grow spiritually to evolve into a co-creator. We all really want to be, if we're the children of God, do we want to be like our parents? And then you have to define the parental, like the Pope, or you have to define the parental nature of the divine, and if that's what you want to be like. And the answer is yes.
I've always thought, of course, I have far less evidence to draw upon than you do, that when you die, there'll be this eureka moment where you go, of course, this all makes sense now.
Yeah, that's the second part of the panoramic life review. When you look at it from a second person point of view, it's like two of you looking at it. One looking at it from your point of view, and the other looking at it from a divine point of view, which is still your point of view, to say, wow, you did really good, or wow, how in the world could you be that stupid? And there comes that eureka moment.
During the break, we were actually talking about things outside of the near-death experience. You're interested in politics, science. We've talked about a bit of this today. The North American Union.
Next summer.
Yeah, and where do you get that from?
I was on a boat cruise to San Luis Obispo, and I happened to be, because I'm obsessive compulsive, I have this...
You've said it 6 times already on this show.
Well, I have this obsession to understand everything. And it just comes from being dead. All of us who've had this experience get like this, because knowledge becomes the greatest possession. And I picked up a local newspaper, and they're building a $150 million convention center to hold its first meeting. The first event that was on the calendar is the declaration of the United States of North American Union. Now, if you track that, you can go back to the NAFTA trade agreement and realize that every president since Herbert Walker Bush have followed this pathway to create and implement NAFTA. And even the present administration, they're still in talks with the Canadian Prime Minister, no matter who it is, the President of Mexico, no matter who it is, the President of the United States, no matter who it is. And you start to look at this, the superhighway, and Warren Buffett buying the Transcontinental Railroad, $6.5 billion. Now, if Warren Buffett spent $6.5 billion, what do you think is going to happen? The argument over this pipeline was really something that I saw as a crisis, this Keystone pipeline, as a slowdown. But it was in the newspaper in Mexico last year. So I got a taxi to go see if they were building this place, and they are building it, $150 million. So if they are building it for that reason, why is it not being reported to us, both in Canada and in the United States, when they can put it in the newspaper in Mexico? And as this comes into play, we need Canadian oil and the North Slope oil. We need America's ingenuity and technology, and we need Mexico as the labor force. And then we become a power equal to the European Union, or equal to now what's going to be called the Asian Pacific Union, led by China. And the ability to isolate us from the need for foreign oil, and to realize that we can patent and then hold and manufacture within our own trade group, either for internal consumption or for exported consumption, that we would become a common market, much like Europe is, and much like the Asian Pacific Union.
We've been chatting for an hour, and I have more questions now than when I started the show.
Well, let's do another show sometime.
I'd love to, and I really appreciate you being on the West Coast Truth today. You are a mighty and powerful spiritual being with dignity, direction, and purpose, Dannion.
And so are you, Russell.
everybody, you got to check out www.dannion.com. That's DANNION.com.
And the Twilight Brigade, the Twilight Brigade, Russell.
That's a different website?
Yeah, you can go to Dannion.com, but it leads to the Twilight Brigade. But the Twilight Brigade is the program to help people embrace where you are as a spiritual being and to become a knowledgeable hospice volunteer.
Well, I'll make sure all the links are posted on the www.westcoasttruth.com website so people get over there.
Thank you, sir.
All right, so thank you once again for being on the West Coast Truth.
Thank you for having me, and be blessed.
You're listening to WCTN.
May we make a suggestion? Take your phone off the hook. Somebody might call during the next hour or so and interrupt your fun.
Get it. $10 million.
Bigger guests, bigger audio. You're listening to the West Coast Truth with Russell Scott, Season 4.
I promise you it's safety guaranteed by aeroplanes, by boats, and tanks, and bombs and guns. Well, it don't work too well, but you're too busy to complain. That's just the way it's always done. Just buy it.
Russell.
Dannion,
Russell.
how are you?
Another tricky day in paradise.
I want to do the first segment on, now last time I asked you, who is Dannion Brinkley? Tell me a bit about yourself. And then he went on a 10-minute speech. So, since you've already been on the program, if you could perhaps do an abbreviated version of that. I'd like you to mention the fact that you used to be a jerk. Because you've mentioned that a couple of times, Dannion.
Well, it's also a point of reference for people. Most people are too woo-woo to suit me, and the Swami business is always filled with people who are reasonably self-righteous, Russell. Well, I didn't start out this way, because if people had like the whole stuff of what people say about me, they don't realize that they live in post Dannion instead of pre-Dannion. Because if they'd lived in pre-Dannion, they'd have the first bullet in them by now, or they would have taken the first couple of hits from a baseball bat. And anyone who knows my past, you can go to my hometown, and anyone knows my past knows that I have no problem in those days of beating the crap out of you.
Okay, well, can we talk about this on the show?
I'll do anything that makes you happy, Russell.
Can you send me a copy of your book?
I can do that. I'll probably send you Saved in Secrets.
Is that the third one?
Yeah, Secrets is the third one. There's Saved, At Peace, and Secrets. And now I have a new one that comes out early next year called 10 Things to Know Before You Go. Aspire to inspire before you expire.
Thank you so much, Dannion. Appreciate it.
Russell, thank you for having me on the West Coast Truth.
What have you been up to?
Well, I've just been working really hard at the VA. I'm trying to create an integrative allopathic complementary paradigm for the veterans who are returning. I'm writing a new book. I'm working on a television show with National Geographic called Forbidden History, a look at things as the anthropological and archaeological viewpoint of who we are and where we came from, and then to put into it, to splice into that, Russell, historical and physical monuments that exist that completely destroy the present day paradigm as we are taught. You know my favorite saying, what are they going to do, kill me?
Dannion, for the audience who doesn't know who you are, perhaps give us an abbreviated version of your autobiography.
Okay, I'm a 62-year-old guy born in South Carolina. I grew up in the South in the 50s and the 60s, and I grew up as a tough guy. I mean, basically a jerk. I was a sports, my way out of the depths of the consciousness. And I had rejected religion completely because I thought it was nonsense. And I went from I didn't like college, so I ended up in the Marine Corps during the Vietnam era and served the United States Marine Corps. And I had that mindset. Then I worked as a contractor with government agencies, and in 1975 I was struck by lightning. I was declared clinically dead for 28 minutes, completely paralyzed for 6 days, partially paralyzed for 7 months, took 2 years to learn to walk and feed myself. And I discovered in that what is now known as a near-death experience. This was in 1975, Russell, before there was any name of the near-death experience. There was no literature or information about it, but I lifted out of my body. I went down a tunnel. I came into a place of bright, brilliant, beautiful light. I realized that we live as dimensional beings in a multifaceted spiritual identity far greater than the physical identity. In the course of the next 22 years, I had to have open heart surgery from damage done from the lightning to my heart. I had a second near-death experience, which really affirmed the first one. And then in 1997, I had to have brain surgery from complications from open heart surgery and being struck by lightning. And I had a third near-death experience. And I began to really see who we are in comparison to religion and what science, that we are spiritual beings, and I began a mission to reduce the fear of death.
Now, Danny, you mentioned that you used to be a jerk. You said this on the last show. Now, what does that mean? Were you a 5% tipper, or would you stab an old lady for her purse?
Well, probably somewhere in between the two.
Okay.
I think I was a pretty good tipper, but when you grow up in the world that I grew up in, might was right. And instead of listening to things, I dealt with it very easily. The first thing you would do is you would knock the first one out. I was a tough guy. I didn't listen to anybody's crap. I didn't care. I had no particular interest in what people thought, and I was the least considerate about what people's opinions were. And when you're a tough guy, you know, it's like being on a Sopranos. You deal with issues straightforward. You either shot it, beat it, or ignored it. And this was my basic premise as a personality type. It led me into sports and then the Marine Corps, because the more damage I could do, the better I felt about myself. I realized how stupid of a psychology that is, Russell, but, you know, it was the way I grew up and it was the way I dealt with issues.
But this is life in the South, is it not?
I think it's life everywhere, you know. It's that self-righteous, I am better than, who are you? I mean, you find this everywhere, but it's basically a Southern characteristic, I'd have to say. But, you know, you have the mob in New York and in Chicago and in Boston and in Philadelphia and in Vancouver. You know, I think you guys have the Hong there. Or the Wu Brothers or the Wu Fu or whatever it is. You have that basic mindset. And once you discover that aspect of yourself and you get people pay attention to you and you got what you wanted because they lived in fear, that's how I grew, because I'm a big guy and I was intimidating.
Well, here in Vancouver, it's a 90-pound guy with a Uzi.
Yeah, but he wouldn't intimidate me. But, you know, people live in that kind of mindset, Russell. It's wrong. It's not smart. But we are always living in a mindset that's either gratification or preservation. In this new book, I write about the two basic concepts of the mental human being. And the two things that a human being does without paying attention to their spiritual self is gratification or preservation. And what they don't realize is about 80% of everything you do is about preservation.
What book is this, Danny?
It's the new book that comes out next year. It's called 10 Things to Know Before You Go.
Okay.
Aspire to inspire before you expire. And what it's based on, Russell, it's based on, I've been a hospice volunteer for 35 years. This is why the near-death experience changed my life. I've been with 2,005 people going from this world to the next, and 422 people taking their last breath. And I compiled a series of questions that I probably asked 1,500 of these people. And it's about looking at what matters when you're at the last and final stages of your life. What matters? And I just created a way and brought it down to 10 basic areas, because why wait till the end of your life to appreciate the things that you're truly going to be concerned about in transition? And why not have a guide to bring it forward in this life so that you can truly get the most out of your life with knowing what people are going to be worried about?
The near-death experience, this is a term, NDE. Now, are your experiences typical for this phenomenon?
I would agree, yes. I mean, it was a term created by Dr. Raymond Moody in 1975. How I became so famous at this, Russell, was Dr. Moody was a medical student at the Medical College of Georgia, which is where they took me after being struck by lightning. And he and I became very good friends because he came to interview me, and I'd have to say that he saved my life, because after a year of trying to understand what had happened and not being able to find it medically or philosophically or historically, without Dr. Moody, I would have never been able to bring this into consciousness. When you go from being a complete jerk, I mean, when that's your mindset and you have a near-death experience and you begin to see the multi-dimensional beauty, power, and presence that we are as spiritual beings, you have a tough time reintegrating that. You know, near-death experiences have caused a lot of divorces, a lot of pain, a lot of anguish, a lot of changing in people's lives. Everybody thinks it's a good thing, but it's not a good thing if you're not surrounded by people who think in that concept. My whole family just wanted me to go back to being a jerk because they couldn't really deal with the person that I was becoming. And yes, I was a little radical in the early days of this experience, Russell.
How so?
Well, because I wanted the whole world to understand. Okay, people needed to understand. I would see so much in religion, I would see so much hypocrisy. In medicine, I came to the concept that the only difference between God and a doctor is God never thinks he's a doctor. And I would listen to, you find a sense of humor in all of that stuff finally. But, you would see this stuff, Russell, and you would know that now it wasn't true. I will bet you that 85% of everything you've ever heard about death outside of the near-death experience is a complete, absolute lie, and it does not happen. And so we all live in a fear-based reality, and that has to stop, because it keeps us from really bringing out the nature of who we truly are and the real meaning of life.
Well, nobody wants to talk about it, Dannion. Everybody knows it's coming, but it's, don't talk about it.
Well, because why? Religion and institutions and governments teach you to be afraid. And if you look at the religious concept, there's only three things. You're going to hell, you're going to heaven, or there's nothing. And then everything else reinforces that. To a doctor, it means failure. If a patient dies, it means that it is a failure. To the philosopher, they don't know. To the scientist, it means there's absolutely nothing left. There's nothing, you're done, you're finished. And when you start to think of it in those terms, people tend to reject it. But think of this, Russell. What's the number one cause of death in North America? Birth. And if you're breathing, you're leaving. So I pushed so hard to try to get people to grasp that and then look for what really matters. What in this life really matters? And when you have a near-death experience, there is a component called the Panoramic Life Review. Okay? This is the single most important thing that people should learn from this experience, because you now look at the science how does near-death experiences happen in such a regular point of view in this day and time? It's easy. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation. The advancements of medical procedures and protocols has created the fact that they keep bringing us back. In 1975, Russell, if you didn't have oxygen to your brain for 5 minutes, you were considered dead. Well, since I didn't have oxygen in my brain for about 28 minutes, that might be some of the reason I'm like I am. But nonetheless, now they're resuscitating people up to 3 hours. So
this leads me to a good question. Sorry to cut you off, Dannion.
Okay.
What is death? As far as I can tell, if you can't be resuscitated, you're dead. That's death.
Yeah, well, you're in for a big surprise, Russell.
Good.
You're in for a good big surprise, because I thought that exact same thing until it happened to me. The reason that, this happened to me.
You were perhaps close to death, but not dead.
No pulse, no respiration, and no EKG for 28 minutes in 1975. Call it what you want, but that's not what they called it. Okay, and then the other two near-death experiences, I was on life support. So, I was not dead. I was going through a medical procedure, and the advancements of these medical procedures were allowed you could cut my heart out of my chest, stop it from beating, and put me on an artificial heart beating machine. Okay? But then I still had this experience, so I will say that once I was dead, and 2 more times I was near dead. So I'll agree with that.
Okay.
You see, look, Russell, I've spent 35 years studying death. If you've been a hospice volunteer for 35 years, and you've been around 2,000 people passing from this world to the next, you learn a whole lot more about this procedure and this methodology than if you just had a near-death experience or you were a doctor. Do they teach doctors about death? Only how to sign off on it.
How to avoid it.
Yeah, how to declare it. That's the only thing they teach a doctor.
Have you ever worked with other people that have had near-death experiences?
Oh, about 1,000.
Oh.
When I traveled with Dr. Mooney for years and years and years, I happened to be able to be on the leading edge of what this became, since it was created by Dr. Raymond Moody, and the foreword to his book was written by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who really helped open America to now hospice, which is a prevalent position in North American medical paradigms. And I got a chance to meet a lot of people, and all the major researchers, Melvin Morris and Ian Stevenson and Dr. George Ritchie. And I got a chance to meet these people and listen to the researchers and listen to what people are talking about, and a chance to listen to a lot of people describe in various forms these experiences.
Dannion, we have to take a break. And when we return, I'm going to play a YouTube clip that claims that you're full of shit.
Well, that'll be exciting.
Dannion Brinkley says he was dead for 28 minutes after being struck by lightning here in Aiken, South Carolina. He says he went to a cathedral of light and met angels, and then he woke up in the hospital morgue. I have an appointment to see Dannion, but first I meet a local journalist, Carl Langley, who was with him the day after he was struck by lightning.
In September of '75, I got a call and said that Dannion Brinkley said he'd been hit by lightning. I went down to visit with him, and he said he was dead for 5 minutes,
Well, now he says 28 minutes.
28 minutes? Good for him. That's all I got to say about that.
He says he woke up in the morgue.
Woke up in the morgue? I never heard that story.
Carl says the Augusta Library should have a copy of the article he wrote the day after Dannion was hit by lightning. It should prove whether Dannion has exaggerated over the years the number of minutes he was dead, from 5 to 28.
Phone call almost cost him his life.
Have you found it?
Right there, that's his wife. That's him right there. Frantically, Mrs. Brinkley began pounding away on her husband's chest. I was out for a few minutes, and she saved my life, Danny said in the story.
So who saved Dannion's life?
His wife, according to what he said.
Not the paramedic or the morgue attendant?
No, he was conscious when he left the trailer.
This is Dr. Eves, Dannion's doctor. He says he was with Dannion within an hour of him being struck by lightning, and he seemed fine.
When I saw him, he was completely lucid, and of course, since then, I've heard other stories that I read in the paper about him being pronounced dead, and they'd pulled a sheet over him. No, that's not true.
Did he mention anything to you about going into a light and seeing a cathedral and meeting God?
The only time I knew about that was when I read about it in the newspaper later. A book he wrote. He wrote a book, you know. And he sold right good many of them locally, I think, but I didn't buy one. I didn't care to read about it.
It was 35 weeks on the New York Times bestsellers list.
You kidding?
Danny, would you like to respond to the video? First of all,
Sure, absolutely.
This Carl, who apparently met you the day after.
Never happened.
Well, Carl claims that you were out for 5 minutes, not 28. So
very easy. Watch. Here's the story. I don't remember a lot about those next 3 days from Wednesday. I remember late Saturday and some of Sunday. So I had to go back and ask people when I heard this stuff. Number one, Carl Langley called on the telephone. He never saw me. He never came to see me. And what I gathered from it was no one had ever been struck by that much lightning, Russell, and has survived, and that I was paralyzed. I mean, no one mentions that I was paralyzed, so somebody had to put the phone up to my ear. So when I went back to ask those questions, Carl never came to the hospital. He called on the phone, and what I said was, since we were all terrified, I wasn't talking about the near-death experience. I was burning it on fire. It was like I was drinking battery acid. And I was trying to create a sense of confidence and security so that Sandy had to know it was okay, because she had done resuscitation on me. She had done a cardiopulmonary resuscitation on me. And I was trying to give her the credit for it. Carl never came to see me. As to Gilmore, Dr. Eves, Gilmore was not my doctor. I hadn't seen Gilmore since I was probably 9 years old. Gilmore was a fundamentalist Baptist in the South. So when I heard this story, I went back after I could get up and move around and tried to find I went to the paramedics, to the doctors, I went to my father, I went to my brother, I went to Sandy, I went to the other 3 people who were at the hospital. Not one of those people ever saw Gilmore Eves. He was not my doctor. I never spoke to him except in 2004 when my mom passed away. I spoke to him at the funeral, and I never had spoke to him. But not one single person ever saw Gilmore Eves come to that hospital. He never signed in. He never put anything in a report in his files. He never talked to a doctor. He never saw my father. He never saw my brother. He never saw Tommy. He never saw Alice. He never saw Sandy. And so whatever he's saying, I mean, that's the mindset of a Southern fundamentalist Baptist doctor who cannot get a single person to verify what he says. And I didn't put that story together, Russell, for probably a year. So if someone came into a hospital and I'm going to start telling them about beings of light and crystal cities and angels, which I never have said any of that, I don't think it would have been Gilmore Eves I would have told it to. And then number two, I never said I woke up in a morgue. So I had to go and find out where this morgue story came from, and I found it in a quote written by some publicist for Harper someplace in the 90s.
Now, Dannion, there is a picture of you on the internet, you from a morgue bed.
Well, and there's one of me in a coffin.
Well, there you go.
I mean, these were publicity photographs for some magazine article, because I'm always trying to make light of everything, Russell. I don't take all that so serious, okay? And what I was looking for is a way to get people to stop, look, and enjoy themselves. But the morgue story was a publicity photo, because I've always said I was on the way to the morgue, because they were so busy that night. They pushed me in a room and covered me with a sheet, and they pushed me in a room. I didn't know any of that till I talked to my father, till I talked to my brother, until I talked to Sandy and the three friends. From the time they put me in the ambulance, Russell, to the time I woke up floating in a hallway, I have no knowledge of what went on. And I had to ask them. So what this guy who was doing this report, he was trying to report on a guy who was doing euthanasia in Ireland, and he used the fact of hearing me in a lecture talk about life after death, and he became to be the god of euthanasia, and he had helped a woman commit suicide.
Yeah, that was Reverend Death was the name of the program.
Yeah, and so what they did was they figured they were attacking him. They weren't attacking me. But when the guy got these two stories, he made it as though it was factual data. But the real story is he took those clips. What you have to do is look where the edits are in those pieces. And what Carl Langley did, Carl never came to see me. And he talked to Sandy more than he talked to anyone else. And he didn't talk to me, he talked to her. And so, I put up a little flip clip on that, because I don't care what people say about me. The most important thing about a near-death experience is how it transforms that person. And I went from a mean SOB to a hospice volunteer, and talk about trying to educate people to health care and the lack of the fear of death, and being at the bedside of over 2,000 people. That's the difference. When people say they have a near-death experience, I want to know what it did to change their life. Okay? And I think that that's the difference in it. But I'm going to always be picked at and pushed and punched and all of that, because I think it's just a part of the game. And people like to be the one that brings someone down, but that's okay. If it's true, I'll admit to it. If it's not true, I will either make a statement about it, or I will try to correct it. And I appreciate you bringing this up, Russell. Thank you.
Well, I think the number one story here is how someone who used to be a jerk transformed into a hospice volunteer and made it his life's work to improve other people's lives, right? I think,
and reduce the fear.
Right, and it took a bolt of lightning to do it. It's not so much the near-death story that's so important here. It's the transformation story.
And the fact that it took 3 times, so it shows you that I'm a little slow-witted. I always say in heaven, they always say, listen, let me tell you something funny, Russell. I always say, look. They always say, look, I think it's time we have to kill him again. Because he's getting a little biggity, and we need to kill him again. So I always look at this, but I always used to say, I believe in coincidences. I just have never seen one. Well, think of this. I was struck by lightning on September the 17th at 7:05 p.m., 1975, on a Wednesday afternoon during a thunderstorm. The lightning hit me in the head just above my ear because I was holding the phone. On September the 17th at 7:05 a.m. on a Wednesday morning during a thunderstorm, 22 years later, I had brain surgery. and they drilled the first hole in my head exactly above my right ear. And if you put your finger in the hole where the lightning went in on my left side, and you put your finger in the hole where the drill went in on my right side, they're exactly parallel. I mean, they're exactly as though it's like, the old story of putting an arrow through your head. They're exactly. So finally I have seen a coincidence. September the 17th at 7:05 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon during a thunderstorm. And then brain surgery September the 17th at 7:05 a.m. on a Wednesday during a thunderstorm in 1997, exactly 22 years later and exactly 12 hours earlier in the same conditions. I think that shows the divine's sense of humor.
Let's get back to the skepticism, Dannion. Have you tried to get a hold of Carl Langley?
No.
And make things right with him? No?
No.
Wikipedia.
But listen, Carl was a reporter, and I think he was just doing his job. I mean, I'm not against anybody. Gilmore, I have a problem with, because what Gilmore Eves said, there is not a single person, not my father, not my brother, not anybody who was in that hospital, not the attending physicians, not anybody in that hospital can say that Gilmore Eves was there but Gilmore Eves. Not another person can verify that. And if he was my doctor, then by law, he is required as that physician to put those notes in his paperwork or in his file on me. He has no file on me. And then, number two.
Wouldn't it be doctor-patient confidentiality regardless?
So he broke the law.
But he wasn't your doctor.
He couldn't do it anyway. It's called the HIPAA laws in the United States. That is a criminal act that puts your license in jeopardy. And then it is amazing how much he appeared to. He's 84 years old. He's 84 years old. And isn't it amazing how much he seemed to remember about an event that happened 35 years ago when a magazine or a video reporter shows up in his office unannounced? He's 84 years old. I guess he can remember yesterday a lot better than, I guess he can remember 20 years or 35 years ago a lot better than he could remember today. But you know what? You expect that kind of stuff. So I've been listening to that kind of stuff forever. I think Raymond's rants, I mean, Raymond wrote a book called
Raymond has made claims that some of your prophetic visions have not materialized the way you said.
And Raymond wrote a book called Laugh After Laugh, which is his vengeful vendetta against the near-death experience. And he was trying to disavow. Raymond decides whether he believes in the near-death experience. He changes his mind about every 2 weeks. Well, it's just Raymond, okay? And so Raymond wrote a whole book about all the things that he said that I have said, called Laugh After Laugh. And he makes fun of me and another woman named Betty Eady. And he calls, the near-death experience, they call it NDE. And Raymond calls us near-death entertainers. And everybody got mad about it because I had done so much for Raymond. I thought it was a compliment myself.
How many books has Raymond written?
Oh, God, probably 7 or 8. But this was one of them. But he went through a list of things that he said that I had said to him. Okay, one that I was a colonel in the Marine Corps. And I laughed because what that conversation was about, Russell, was I would drive 10 hours from Washington to Alabama because Raymond was having a lot of trouble. And I remembered half that stuff. I don't ever remember having the conversation, but I distinctly remembered this. Is we were sitting on the back porch with Raymond, and we were just talking about where our lives would be. And I was working with a guy named James Zumwalt, who was Admiral Zumwalt, Chief of Naval Operations, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Supreme Commander of Vietnam. And I was talking to Jim, who's the same age as I am, when I was in Washington, because we were working a contract. And I thought that, where would I be if I'd never been struck by lightning? And I had loved the Marine Corps, and I loved working for the government because I stayed as a defense contractor till probably 1997 or 98. And so I had said, I could have been a colonel in the Marine Corps, because I was thinking about James and the same Colonel Zumwalt in the same age group. And Raymond, in his Mixedema rant, turned that into something that I was saying that I was, as opposed to me just sitting there reminiscing. So there is so much about what Raymond says that if anyone reads his book Paranormal, understands that you honestly and sincerely can't trust or believe a lot of what he's saying. And people believe, Raymond is the godfather of the near-death experience. But anyone who reads that book can realize that the nature of what happens in Mixedema and the kind of psychological problems that evolved in Raymond's life, which he clearly states in his book, gives credence to the fact of why he has such misinformation. And I think that, Russell, what happened was there came a time when people didn't want to talk to a doctor about it. They wanted to talk to people who had come out and had the experience. And the world started paying more attention to us, the survivors of it, than paying attention to Raymond. Now, I'm not saying that this is the absolute fact, but this is just my point of view of looking at it because of the relationship I have with Raymond now. But I don't know how many people Raymond's been with when they passed or what Raymond's done that really affects. But I have all the admiration for Raymond, and he can talk about me all he wants. It still doesn't change the fact that without him, I would have never found a footing that I could be of service to humankind in the way that I think that I'm supposed to be if I had not come across Raymond in the early months after, it was about a year after this experience.
There are quotes from Raymond Moody that are saying that things aren't materializing the way you've said they would be.
Well, I'll say this. The visions or the boxes of knowledge were accurate because so many of them. I mean, you're talking tons of them, but you got to look back.
I mean, he quotes a pre-2000 economic collapse that never happened, or a nuclear accident in Norway or something.
Okay, but watch this one. When did the economic collapse come? 2001. George Bush came in and spent every penny that we had, and in the first year went $450 billion in debt. Okay, and look at this. The United States owes $16 trillion. Do you think that's not economic collapse? Okay, I said that people would flood over the borders from Mexico and South America, and they would flood over the borders, and they'd have to put military on the borders to stop it. That was another one of Raymond's that didn't happen. But did that happen? Okay, the incident in Norway, they discovered in 2000 and I'll give you two good ones. In 1999 or 2000, they discovered that the Russians had been dumping nuclear waste from their submarines in Norway, and that this nuclear hazard had created a way that the most prestigious fishing grounds for the Norwegians could not be fished for 1,000 years. It would be 1,000 years before the Norwegians could go back to where their fishermen could go back because they discovered a nuclear waste. I also said that Chernobyl, which I saw the word wormwood, and I did not know that the Ukrainian word for wormwood, which was a tree, was Chernobyl. And I said that it would kill hundreds of thousands of people. Everybody says it hasn't. But if you study the statistics on thyroid removal and the kinds of cancers in that area, I was right. Okay, the other one was, and I said that I believed that Egypt would collapse in 1997 because that's how I interpret it. Now Egypt has collapsed, but in 1997 it was when those group of terrorists killed all those people at the Temple of Hatshepsut, and they began to overrun the fact that the Sudan were invading southern Egypt in 1997. I just misinterpreted it. You know, these things that happen, and I'm not a perfect prognosticator, Russell, but I have seen so many of these things come true so that I would know the timeline. I also said that the battle for the souls of humankind would be fought in healthcare in America. And today, healthcare in the United States is before the Supreme Court. And is it a battle? Absolutely. If you look at the United States, what this healthcare plan is, the president is now pushing it as a commerce plan. And what would happen is if you didn't buy insurance in the United States, the enforcement agency would be the IRS. So that would mean that this agency that dealt with healthcare would literally control every aspect of your life. And through the IRS, they could have access to your bank accounts and everything. And what would you not do to protect your parents, yourself, your children, and your grandchildren if such a law was enacted? I believe in universal health care. I'm a proponent. I just don't like this bill the way it's done. But I said this in 1977, so anyone can sit and pick through them. Anyone can do it. People listen to Raymond, but if you read his new book, Paranormal, it is very to understand how Raymond got confused in interpreting things, just like the idea of me being a colonel in the Marine Corps. You know, there are a lot of things that if someone asked Raymond if this happened, that would completely change that. But as long as Raymond admits that it was an illness, and as long as Raymond admits that he was a little confused and depressed and tried to kill himself 2 or 3 times in that same period of time, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to be critical and blame or be angry at Raymond or because he's saying that stuff? Or am I supposed to just love him and appreciate him and be thankful for what he's done for me in my life and how he opened the door that so many people now have a paradigm protocol to look and explore death in their own life and help find a nature to be less afraid? I will choose the latter as opposed to anger.
Have you read the book Stolen Valor?
Oh, yeah.
Both accounts say that military records show that you never went overseas during the Vietnam War and you were actually stationed in Georgia as a truck driver.
We now call it Blackwater. We now understand that the government farms out and contracts out this kind of stuff.
And this kind of stuff is what? You were a sniper in the Vietnam War?
Never said I was a sniper. Everybody had certain, and I can't say the exact place, Russell. I mean, I can't say exactly where it was because that was a part. I wrote about this in Secrets of the Light because that was a part of when you have certain things that you agree that you'll never do because it has to do with national security. But when you look at all that stuff, remember, they can create anything that they want. Okay? And when you have ops, I never like the term black ops, but you have special ops. And when you look at, we were fighting proxy wars in a lot of places. I did try to protect people who served with me, but I don't know where all that government got that. And I went to look and see at the place that they said that I was assigned, and that was an intelligence unit. And the guy who wrote it said that I was probably just still delivering toilet paper and He went on to be cynical, and he said I was delivering toilet paper, and yeah, he was right, because I was working and volunteering in hospices. But if anybody checks this guy out, he was a supply clerk. He never was in combat, and he found a way to give himself great credibility, and he has a couple of pictures of him in outfits in Vietnam, but if you look, he had spit and polished boots on, so I'm not going to argue with him, and people can believe whatever they want to believe. But I think my history prior to 1975 makes it a fortunate place that I am where I am now, or else I would have reacted to it completely different. I think that's the thing I'm the proudest of. But I am an honorably discharged United States Marine, and I take great pride in that, and I was proud to serve my country in whatever capacity that I could serve it in. And I think now we don't have to rationalize and cover up and hide certain things, because we now know we have contractors. I was at the very beginning of those contracting agencies. You realize that Blackwater, who was developed in North Carolina, is now living, the guy left the country and he now lives in Dubai somewhere. But in the early years, when you didn't want the world to know about special ops and projects and programs and intelligence gathering, you operated a certain way. And I will not deny that I operated within that framework. I think when Paul was writing the book, he was taking one or two sentences from things so that it would create a little more drama than I wanted to bring forth. But when you write a book, you do they do what they want to do, and you just go along with it. But I don't have a problem with answering any of those questions. And let me tell you this. Thank you for bringing this up, though, Russell. Do I sound like I'm really afraid about dealing with each and every one of those things that you bring up? And you're just bringing them up right now.
I can tell the audience straight up that Dannion could care less what question I ask him. There is no agenda here, so you're right. No. Yeah. Let's take a break, Dannion. We're way over, so we'll be back in 2 minutes with Dannion Brinkley. Dannion, after you wrote your book, Saved by the Light, and you started to appear on all these programs, the Oprah Winfrey Show, Larry King, a movie was made about it, starring Eric Roberts. How did this change your life? What do you think about all of this?
Well, it made people scrutinize my life a whole lot more. And like all of us in growing up, there's things in your life you don't want the world to know about. But then once this began to happen, I really didn't have a choice but to face myself. I think the other thing that really bugged the hang out of me, Russell, was I told the same story 75.6 million times. And I have to go back, and each time you think back through the pain, what I went through and how devastating these experiences were. Look at brain surgery. And after brain surgery, I had a massive grand mal seizure and went into cardiac arrest, was put in the neurocardiac ward on life support. Okay? And when you start to think back through that stuff, even casually in a conversation like on the radio, I don't read my press because I know too much about me, Russell. And as I watched my life unfold before the very world, it made me probably more responsible. But I set goals, things that I wanted to achieve. And there's another movie in the works right now. Because remember, that movie, Saved by the Light, was the highest rated television movie in American history. And right now it's being seen all over Europe and in China because of B-Sky B and because Canal Plus, which is the large French distributor and movie maker, they bought the movie after it and they own it. So I think the thing that it helped me in is this movie is being seen. I go to Europe like 4 times this year, and this movie is being seen so many places that people are beginning to look at the fact that death is not something to be afraid of. And even with all the things that we've talked about, that there's a certain place that people can trust about me. I don't get all involved in all of that. But my biggest pride, this is something I'm very proud of all this fame and all this scrutiny, is Secrets of the Light, the last book that I wrote. Secrets of the Light is the first book in HarperCollins' history, and HarperCollins is a giant publisher. It's the first book ever published in simple Chinese by HarperCollins, who was founded in the 1800s. Mine was the first book because of the fact that the French turned it into voiceover in Chinese, which is a really funny video to watch, and people are starting to buy this book, and I'm really, really proud of that. Fame is a place where you have to always remember, number one, the lights go down, and the lights turn off, and the curtain goes down, and you just some prick in a hotel room somewhere waiting for the next morning. I think that hospice work, I think that being at the bedside is so grounding for me, Russell. You know, it is the value that gives me the ability to fight for the rights of veterans in America. Fame brings me the ability that when I want something that helps a veteran or their family and they can't get it because of the bureaucracy, I am capable of bringing enormous pressure to bear against the bureaucracy to serve the needs. I can get on any television show or any place that I want to go when I have a cause that I believe in, and I can show up in places to raise money. I can go to movie stars and sit and get them to co-op and help in the presenting of information and supporting of things that I see wrong in my government, I see wrong in issues. And so fame has served me well in that way. It has helped me fund the growth of the Twilight Brigade, which is probably the largest end-of-life care volunteer program for dying veterans in the history of this country. And it has afforded me to be able to sell millions and millions and millions and millions of books.
How many books have you sold, Dannion?
I have absolutely no idea, but it's in the multi-millions.
Right.
I mean, I just wait for them to send me the check. I'm really glad that, think of this though, Russell. Saved by the Light, written in 1993 and published in 1994, is probably still selling 10,000 books a month. And the other books are still selling. Secrets is selling, At Peace is, because I wanted to write a trilogy. And then this idea of a new movie, you know, this was brought to me, and it gives a chance to take it from, the last movie ended after, in 1995, and then came the third near-death experience of brain surgery in 1997. If you look at the books, they can succinctly, I can take Secrets of the Light, and I can come into a fact of something I discovered in the third near-death experience that I didn't experience in the first two. And it is a platform for a movie. They're working, the original writer of Saved is now working on a script.
So this will be a sequel to the first one?
Well, I hope it is, but you know what, Russell? When you're in Hollywood, you know, there's a lot of creative licenses and then 75,000 opinions. I'm just waiting to see, because I own the books and I own the rights. And when they made the movie Saved by the Light, it's like the book Saved by the Light. What in the heck do you think I was thinking? You know, I never thought that it would become a cult classic. I never realized that it would become the highest rated television movie in history. Who in the world would think that kind of stuff? You know, and when they were making the movie, I just thought it was a commercial for book sales. I never realized that the French would get rich off of it. You know, I never thought like that.
And it would catapult Eric Roberts to superstardom?
And change his life. You know?
Did it really?
Yeah, it changed his life. I mean, he went through a period of really transition and tried to straighten his life up. I heard he kind of relapsed. But, you know, I thought he did a great job. I think Eric Roberts is an absolute fabulous actor.
Yeah.
And I think he portrayed the Dannion characteristics in nature brilliantly. I mean, we could have done a better job, but it was a TV movie. If I was making that same movie today, which is something they've all brought to me, studio houses and filmmakers, I get those pitches like about twice a week. Everybody comes with another idea, but I just listen to that stuff. And when John, the original writer of Saved by the Light, when John Mandel came to me with this idea, I really listened to it because I saw the success. But you know what? Fame is fleeting. I think the legacy of what Dannion is the transformational nature that has happened. And that I hope that it inspires people to take a look at the books and information and find something in it that changed their lives. I never was perfect, and I'm not perfect now, but I'm a lot better than I once was. And I take pride, and I'll tell you my last point, Russell. I have searched endlessly for something that would have happened in my life that would have brought me to a perspective about the divine other than the near-death experience, because all I have to be thankful for is that I was dead to come to a place of a spiritual awareness that I now have. Well, I don't have anything except maybe the Mayan, because I discovered when I went to the 1968 Mexican Olympics, I discovered pyramids, and I became a pyramid fetish researcher, but not from a cosmic point of view, but from an anthropological, archaeological point of view.
Okay, not pyramid power.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know anything about that. But you always, when you look at how many places on the earth these pyramids are, and you look at the Schumann resonance, which is the magnetic fields and what they call the ley lines, how these pyramids in China and in Egypt and in the mound builders in America and this new one in Bosnia, the way they structured them in India and in Mesoamerica, you have to really stop and see that there was something to it. The other thing that I realized from that is, do you realize that every calendar, the Hebrew calendar, the Mayan calendar, the Incan calendar, the Aztec calendar, the Egyptian calendar, the Hebrew calendar, all of them, all those calendars started between 3104 and 3114. Within a 10-year period, every recognized historical calendar began to exist. When you stop to think about that, it has to relate that there is a single source to our historical past. And I think that that would have influenced me, but nothing has influenced me more than seeing that we are great, powerful, and mighty spiritual beings that have dignity, direction, and purpose, who choose to come to this world and who are chosen to come to this world.
I know it bores you, but what was Oprah Winfrey like in real life?
We became good friends. And Oprah is evolving, like all of us. But I enjoyed Oprah. I mean, she's a Southern girl. And people from the South, we're all cousins for more reasons than people think. You know, they'll joke that if you go get a divorce, you have to ask the judge if you can still be cousins.
Right.
But I liked Oprah. Oprah was kind and loving and wonderful. I think she's bitten off a little more than she can chew with this Oprah network. Okay, I think that. But I have never had a bad moment with this lady. And I've had some of the best conversations, you know, and Southerners deal with each other no matter how much they live in the North. Southerners have a way to deal with each other. Now, I've been seeing a lot of those people who I didn't really appreciate, you know, Harry, the guy on at CBS, I don't remember his name, was Harry something. But people who don't have an open mind, I enjoy torturing them, seriously. But Oprah was open. And when Oprah's makeup person that had been with her for 30 years, when his mom was passing away, Oprah called me and asked me would I go and see her and help her, and I did. And so she called me and thanked me for that. And I think Oprah's a wonderful person. She represents what drive does and the possibilities that anybody in this country can achieve anything. And I wish her only the very best. I mean, I love her.
We had a very long segment last time, so we'll go to break and wrap up the show with today's guest, Dannion Brinkley. Thanks very much, Danny, for being on the program. I know you love it.
I do, Russell. You know, you are great. I think that you will come about and evolve into the next Art Bell, and I'm sincerely and truly supportive of that. And I'll tell you something else, too. I don't always have a chance to just get to be myself, and you allow that in a gracious and a very wondrous way, and I appreciate it, Russell.
Well, it's the West Coast truth, Dannion. So the point here is that we can all be ourselves, and that's what truth is.
Well, each one decides what is true for them, and that's what I say about myself. I always tell people, take whatever you hear from me that helps you and embrace it and throw the rest away. I'm not trying to be the next guru or the most expert on any other thing. I will say that I know as much about the death process for the physical, mental, and spiritual being. I mean, there's people who know maybe a little more, but they're contemplating their navel somewhere on a mountaintop in India. But down here where the rubber meets the road, I understand the shift in medical paradigms. I understand the evaluation of what we call death. And when you take a look at quantum mechanics and theoretical quantum theory, you realize that the evolution of where science and spirituality are merging. And I think that is an important facet in where we are as humankind today.
You know, I know you like to be Dannion Brinkley, and you've been great because how many times have you told the story of you being struck by lightning now, Dannion?
Probably 100 million.
Okay, conservatively.
You know, think about this. I mean, it's been 35 years, and I have been on the lecture circuit since 1977. I've been out here as long as anybody.
Now, Dannion, I've added you to my Facebook, and you've been talking about microchipping. It's even up there on your website. So I was interested in what some of your views are concerning the state of security in the United States and the atmosphere in general.
Well, I think that much of the state of security is a systematic control. I mean, if you look at Homeland Security and the fact that it's called Homeland, it's almost literally the same program that Hitler put forth. I don't think that the sense of national security and the idea of consistent terror. I look at this chipping technology because it was part of the vision from 1975 and being struck by lightning, and I have seen those beings of light, be consistently accurate. Even though we had earlier conversations, there has been dozens and dozens and dozens of things that I have not missed that we had talked about. This chipping technology, if anyone reads Saved by the Light They See, I described this 18 years ago, and I wrote about it in 1977. I believe where America is under the NAFTA trade agreements. I'll make this prognostication that next year, the absolute beginnings of the United States of North America will come into play.
Now, when you say that, Dannion, do you mean that will be obvious for everyone?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It'll not only be obvious for everyone, it will become what will be generally accepted as the mandate. Okay, and now this is the points. That Canada will be the fuel source, America will be the technology source, and Mexico will be the manufacturing source, and the United States of North America will come into play. I believe that the absolute elimination of currency will soon be a natural occurrence, that they have to have a plastic society, which leads to easier financial situations, but greater control over our lives. I believe that healthcare and how it's being modeled, we are modeling on the British model of the Canadian system, which I think has a lot of good qualities, Russell, but a lot of really bad qualities. Okay, and when America says it has the greatest healthcare system, we're number 24 in healthcare among the industrialized nations, so we pay twice as much as anybody. I pay attention to these things because we are at a precipice. We are evolving into what the Mayans call the universal period, where there is no separation. Quantum mechanics and physics has proven that we're all connected with this force called dark matter. We also realize that we can, in real time, be anywhere in the world on our cell phones. And so the connectivity of humankind is evolving into a new consciousness of where we're being aware and ready. I believe that the internet serves a worthwhile purpose, but it creates cocooning. Text creates a way that you don't communicate. And if you can keep people separated from community activities, which is what happens with the internet and text, then you force them into a place of isolational psychology. And I think if you can scare them, they'll want to stay home. So I try to incorporate myself in all of this. If you look at Google, Google has 900 million people. It's the third largest country in the world. And then Google just recently bought YouTube. So you always go to those conscious thoughts where programs like yours are the last free enterprising frontiers for people's thoughts and actions. We all know if we watch British, Canadian, and even American, all of them talk about the exact same information. There is nothing new on any of the nightly news. There's nothing new on the cable news. It's all the same. So we are reaching a paradigm shift. Some of it is really, really good, Russell, but some of it is nothing but the elitist, one world controlling. But I think that what's going to be so marvelous, and this is the thing, the day I wait for, is the day of pharmaceutical companies, since we now know we live in an electrical universe, that the day a pharmaceutical company has to explain how a pill works energetically. I think that is with MRIs and the revolution of what's coming in electromedicine. This will begin to change people's conscious attitudes about themselves, and I look forward to it. And who in the world would want to miss the end of time, Russell?
Is that this year?
Well, to the Mayans, December the 21st doesn't mean anything. Okay?
Oh.
To astrophysicists, the rise of solar flares means a lot. If you realize, just a couple of weeks ago, they had a solar flare explosion that the explosion went a couple of million miles into space, and they were measuring the massive amounts of neutrino particle bombardment in the Earth's electromagnetic field. And if that plasma burst or sunburst or solar flare had been probably 12 degrees more toward the Earth instead of to the what we would say would be the left-hand side of the sun, we would not have had power for probably 2 months.
Globally, yeah. Right.
To the astrophysicist, you have to pay attention to that, and you have to realize, look at the electrical grid of North America. The electrical grid of North America, Russell, was built in the 20s. And the Canadian grid, you're in the 30s.
Depending on where you are.
Yeah, I mean, they built it in the 1890s to 1928, and everything else is just an add-on. So, you have to pay close attention to, I recommend this to everybody for the next year and a half, is if the electricity was turned off for a month, what would you do? And I'm not telling people that that's going to happen, but I'm looking at all the things that are variables. And if I wanted to take control of a nation, I would plunge them into darkness. And right now, with what we're looking at in subways and train stations and all the things about American psychologies and terrorism and they hate us because of who we are and all that nonsense, that's people who've never been to the Middle East. They don't hate us because of who we are. They hate us because we have been taking their natural resources and we've been supporting dictatorships.
Will people be free, Dannion?
Absolutely. There is no doubt that by pushing issues like the near-death experience, pushing the advancements in quantum mechanics, pushing that you cannot repress the spiritual nature of a person's yearning to be free, we will win. The greatest part about the boxes of knowledge was that around 2014, and I'm still not Nostradamus, Russell, okay, no matter what Raymond says, so many of these things have come true. Mm-hmm. And at 2013 will become a revelation. We'll all see that we're being had. And by 2014, literally, what we're watching now is the Occupy movements and these kinds of things. This same stuff happened in the 60s. Okay, there was that revolution that brought down, and look at President Obama. He had to go to Afghanistan because we have lost Afghanistan. He has to go to Afghanistan to predict and say that he's going to end the war. He has no choice. He has no choice but to do it. You realize, Russell, that there has never been anyone who has conquered Afghanistan. The last time anyone captured and held Afghanistan for any period of time was in like 346 BC under Alexander the Great. And when the Ottoman Empire, who ruled almost all of Europe and most of Asia for 700 years, and Constantinople, which is Istanbul in Turkey, was the head, that the Ottomans would march around Afghanistan instead of through it because they knew that those Afghanistanis would kill them. And now we have been there, the longest war we've ever fought to lose. It's just another Vietnam.
There's actually a report today on, I think it's Rents, that Obama extended the Afghanistan war until 2021.
Well, I have no doubt that we have to, because what happens is Turkey's going to be the gateway, and as a secular regime, at the secular regime of Turkey and the moderate Islamic and the fundamentalist Islamic positions, Turkey is the power and it's the gateway to the East. We have to have a position, but it also gives us the ability to keep Pakistan in a certain amount of control, because as long as Pakistan and India are enemies and that Pakistan has nuclear weapons, by being in Afghanistan, we hold a gateway to access Pakistan, which gives the Indians a chance to develop without having to look over its back in dealing with the Chinese. The Chinese are more frightened of India than they are of anywhere else in the world, and it's not because of a war machine, it's because of manufacturing. If the India, remember, after 400 years of British rule, most Indians speak English, whereas in China there is a fast-moving effort to advance in teaching them English, where most Indians grew up. And China's in a lot of trouble, Russell. People don't understand what's happening. If China doesn't keep an 8.2 growth average, it will end up in total internal anarchy. You know, they have to. So that's the big issue. We have to keep Pakistan from completely destabilizing Afghanistan. And where else are you going to get cheap heroin if we lose control of Afghanistan?
Who do you see being the president in 2013?
I don't see any difference between any of them.
It's Obama.
Yeah, there's no difference. They're the same person. There's no difference. I mean, if you think that Romney ever, I mean, I support what everybody does, but there is no difference. They are all the same. Okay, they're all the same. If you look at the issues, they're all the same. The president doesn't run anything. He doesn't run anything. He just does what he's told.
He just runs his mouth.
Yeah, and no, he reads the teleprompter.
Right.
Okay, and if you look at what if you look at who are the financiers of both of them, they both have the same people giving them money, and it's industry, it's banks, it's the control. You know, it's like Rothschild said, "Give me control of the money, and I don't care who writes the laws." And if you look at the bills for what they stand for, there's no difference. What the President of the United States has to worry about is he didn't cover up his past as well as he should. And so they have to have another him, have to have another person who understands being rich in power. Okay? I don't think that, I'm not against any of that stuff, you know, against them, but by watching them, you realize that if they slip up and the stuff about the president becomes more factual, then you have to have someone you would put into office, and you look at the conspiracy theorist and all of that stuff, and you watch it, because I promise this presidential election cycle of the United States of America of 2012 was important. You will see historic. You will see billions of dollars spent to get a $400,000 a year job. Billions. They plan to raise $1 billion to run for president. Is that not crazy?
Probably not. There's probably a reason for it.
Well, wonder what that reason is, Russell. Well, to move agendas forward.
Corruption, yeah, I mean, we know what it is.
You put the face on the agenda.
Dannion, I'm very excited because you're coming to town.
Yeah, I'm coming there December the 2nd and 3rd, and you're going to be my co-presenter. So, the Truth in the West and Russell.
You don't even know the name of the show, Dannion. It's the West Coast Truth.
Yes, I do. I was going to say it. Russell and the West Coast Truth and Dannion Debunked at newsforthesoul.com.
Yeah.
And it's Nicole Whitney. And if anyone goes to News for the Soul or comes to Dannion.com, that's DANNION.com, and see all the adventures and all the stuff that I'm coming in. And I can't wait for you to Facebook me, because people don't really realize, Russell, if you'll see, I write back to a lot of those people because it's, you know, they are my friends. When people sign up, and I go on Facebook because I find people I haven't seen in 20 years, and I write a lot. You'll see a lot of times that's me answering. Mm-hmm. And so I look forward to it, and I appreciate what everybody does. I hope people go to Dannion and the Twilight Brigade so that I can help them be able to help someone they love or someone who loves them in a safe passage from this world to the next. And I hope that that's what I'm most remembered for, as opposed to that other stuff that I'm famous for or infamous for.
Well, hopefully we'll have you on the show before you come to town, just to,
please,
to let everybody know and make sure the place is packed, which I'm sure it will be. I'll make sure of that. Don't worry about it.
I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And
and let the audience know, remind the audience of your books once again, the Light series, Dannion.
Saved by the Light, At Peace in the Light, and The Secrets of the Light, all can be found on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, well, Borders doesn't exist anymore, Books A Million, or on Dannion.com. If you go and order the books off of Dannion.com, you're helping support the Twilight Brigade.
Okay, so we'll link your books, which are on www.westcoasttruth.com, to the Dannion website.
I appreciate that.
People purchase the books that way, and that way some money gets through to the Twilight Brigade. Dannion, is there anything we haven't covered today that you wanted to say?
That I appreciate you very, very much, Russell.
Well, you've said that many times.
Well, I'm going to say it again. And that I appreciate how you've structured your show, and I appreciate the fact that you allow me not to be a dead guy, but to be a human being that has a life, that faces the good and the bad in that life, and I just get a chance to be me. And I appreciate that because people always pigeonhole me into the dead guy.
Yeah, it's a dancing monkey thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, just turning the chime.
Yeah.
And you allow me just to be a guy like everybody else, because the thing that I hope people remember most is I have seen myself in the spiritual dimension, which really means I have seen them too. No one is better than me, and I know who they are. And I've tried to write books and put out lectures and create a ideology so that people can look at that and see the greatness in themselves and lose the fear of death and empower the life they live. And I thank you for allowing me to be something else other than that, just to be another person.
Dannion, I appreciate being your friend. You're a genuine guy. Appreciate you being on the show. Dannion Brinkley, thank you very much for being on the West Coast Truth.
Thank you, Russell.